Hey there, you're listening to Vixen After Dark. I'm Ipsha Dutta, your host, your storyteller, and the girl who clearly still hasn't learned when to stop listening to things that speak from the other side. Tonight isn't just another strange night in Bhubaneswar. It's the last one in this story. The last stretch of a bridge I've been walking between the living and the ones who refuse to be forgotten. Last time, in the listener between stations, the house had stopped pretending everything was fine. Time slipped, memories frayed, and the buzzing in the walls finally started to sound like what it really was. Something old, stretching after a very long sleep. Auntie's mind kept falling sideways into other years. Grandma traded small talk for riddles. And Sanjeevani began sleepwalking through coordinates only a haunted railway map would understand. The coolie in red, the man I'd first met at Howrah, stepped out of the fog and finally told me the truth. He wasn't just a lingering soul. He was a guardian, one of the watchers between worlds. Bound to me since the night something in a lake tried to pull me under as a child. And the thing we were fighting? Ekaksha, the one-eyed watcher. Once a guardian like him, who looked too far into the dark and never stopped seeing. Now it feeds on attention, on being seen, borrowing eyes and mirrors and sketches to pull itself into the world. The guardian in red stood under the streetlight one last time and told me the part I didn't want to hear, that I wasn't just caught in the middle. I was the middle, a bridge between remembering and forgetting, a listener between stations. He told me how he'd bound Ekaksha once before, with mirrors, reflection, and blood. And as he began to fade, he told me I'd have to do it again, that I'd have to blind a watcher that only grows when the world looks straight at it. Then he did what guardians do when their part of the bridge ends. He left. He disappeared with the smell of sandalwood and iron in the air. And after that, we followed Sanjeevani's coordinates to an abundant stretch of railway land on the outskirts. Rust, fog, old signal posts, and a buried locket someone had used as an anchor to wake Ekaksha up again. We sealed the locket, ringed it in salt, and pressed it back into the ground. But a silver ring with familiar initials, and the way Sweetu's face changed when she saw it, made one thing very clear. This wasn't random. Someone wanted Ekaksha awake. All that remained was a city on the edge of Halloween, a night built on masks, eyes, and fear, and something one-eyed and hungry, already listening from the dark. This is episode 5, Between Sight and Silence, the final chapter in Echoes of the One-Eyed Watcher. It's the day before Halloween. The sky over Bhubaneswar feels wrong, like it's holding its breath. The Nayak apartment is forgetting itself in pieces, and the one person who's been guarding my steps from the other side has already started to fade. Tomorrow, on Halloween itself, the whole city will put on masks, light candles, and laugh in the face of the dark. Perfect night for something that feeds on being seen. And I have one job: to turn a watcher's gaze back on itself. before it learns to wear our faces. So grab your headphones, find a corner of your room you usually ignore, and if, at any point while you're listening, you feel like something with only one eye is waiting just outside your reflection, maybe don't lean in to check. This is where the bridge bends, and this is where this chapter ends. By the time the 30th of October dawned, the air in Bhubaneswar felt strange, weighted, like the sky itself was waiting for something to happen. It wasn't the bright, celebratory kind of anticipation that usually fills the days before Halloween, but the uneasy stillness that comes right before an explosion. The sunlight looked tired, as though it had burned too long and wanted to rest. Every shadow lingered just a heartbeat too long. The city's sounds, the street vendors' calls, the distant horns, the laughter from the school nearby, all felt muted, as if the world had placed a palm gently over its own mouth to hush itself. Even the Nayak apartment had changed. It wasn't haunted in the loud cinematic sense. It was quieter, subtler, the kind of haunting that seeps into the walls and stares out from unplugged mirrors. The curtains swayed when there was no wind. The clocks ran slow. The lights dimmed without reason, and sometimes the reflections didn't keep up. The house felt as if it were remembering itself in pieces, like an old dream trying to reassemble. The morning began with a knock on the door. Soft, hurried, too ordinary for how unreal the day felt. Sweetu looked up from her half-drunk cup of chai, startled, and hesitated before opening it, as though bracing for something she couldn't name. Instead, 3 small whirlwinds of life stood there, all color and chatter and paint-stained fingers. The first, a serious-looking girl with tight braids and an oversized backpack nearly swallowing her whole, clutched a plastic box full of sketch pens to her chest like sacred treasure. The second, a boy with wild hair and laughter in his eyes, had doodled a crooked ghost on his t-shirt and seemed proud of it. The third, a tiny thing in pigtails and a glitter-smeared paper crown, looked up at Sweetu with the kind of unshakable confidence that only 6-year-olds possess.
"Sweetu auntie,"
the youngest one squealed, bouncing on her toes.
"Tomorrow's the Halloween costume competition. You said you'd help us make ghost masks."
"Yeah, and zombie paint,"
the boy chimed in, his hands already suspiciously smudged with green and red. For a long moment, Sweetu simply stared at them, as though she couldn't place who they were or why they were here. The color drained from her face before she forced a faint, mechanical smile, crouching down to their height. Her voice came out soft, careful.
"Oh, right. The contest,"
she murmured.
"Of course. You 3 finish your costumes first, I'll help later."
They grinned, unbothered by her distracted tone. The girl with the braids peered curiously past Sweetu, spotting me hovering awkwardly near the hallway.
"Auntie, who's that?"
Before Sweetu could fumble for an answer, Sanjeevni swooped in smoothly, like she'd done this her whole life.
"That's Ipsha auntie,"
she said, with mock gravity, gesturing to me.
"She's Sweetu auntie's friend from Kolkata. You know, the one who can draw ghosts so scary, even the paper runs away."
The boy's jaw dropped.
"Really?"
"Only when the ghosts behave," I said, crouching to their level. "Otherwise, they sulk and steal my razors." That earned giggles. The little one gasped dramatically,
Do ghosts really talk to you, Auntie?
I leaned in, pretending to think about it. Only when there's a full moon, and when they are bored. They shrieked with delight, trading gleeful glances, and Sanjeevni chuckled.
Ipsha, meet Tina, Rohit, and Munni. Sweetu's drawing proteges and part time glitter terrorists.
Hey,
Rohit said, indignant.
that was one time, and it was biodegradable.
Sure, it was.
Sanjeevni said, smirking.
My hair still sparkles every time I sneeze.
Even I laughed, but the sound died quickly when I glanced back at Sweetu. She was still smiling, but faintly. A thin, brittle thing that didn't touch her eyes. After the kids scampered off, their laughter echoing down the corridor, Sweetu just stood there for a moment, her hand still resting on the door, as if afraid to close it.
I completely forgot about their competition.
She said, her voice distant.
Most people forget birthdays.
Sanjeevni muttered from the sofa.
You forgot an entire festival. We're definitely cursed.
The joke landed flat. Sweetu didn't even react. Her gaze had drifted toward the low table where the wooden box sat, the one containing the silver ring we'd found the night before. I'd noticed it before, the way she avoided looking directly at it, but could never quite look away either. That kind of avoidance had a shape. Guilt, maybe? Or memory? I studied her quietly, the investigator in me clicking pieces together that I wasn't ready to voice yet. The ring wasn't just some cursed relic tied to Ekaksha. It meant something to her. Someone. And whoever that person was, the memory was sharp enough to draw blood. Sweetu rubbed her arms as though the air had suddenly turned cold.
They've been waiting all week for me to help.
She murmured, more to herself than to us.
I promised them masks and lanterns. I don't even have the supplies.
Sanjeevni softened, setting down her mug.
Dee, it's okay. Nobody's going to blame you for not being Martha's steward during a haunting.
Sweetu gave a weak laugh that barely counted as one.
Maybe they should. Pretending to make ghosts is easier than real ones showing up.
And before either of us could answer, she turned and slipped into the kitchen, the sound of the kettle's click filling the silence like the start of a clock counting down. I stayed where I was, watching the light dull further behind the curtains. Something about that ring tugged at me. A connection, a purpose, maybe even a motive. The question wasn't just who it belonged to, it was why someone would wake Ekaksha for it. And as the faintest chill swept through the apartment, I had a sinking feeling that the answer was already inside this house. By mid-morning, the house felt smaller. The air carried that faint metallic tang that comes just before a storm. Sharp, unclean, and oddly electric, as if someone had rubbed two invisible wires together just beneath the skin of the world. The light stayed on, but their glow looked wrong, too old, like it was filtering through dirty glass. Auntie had taken to bed. Her body was there, but her mind, it had started slipping through the cracks of time. She woke in bursts, calling out names that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Meeta, Nisha, Meera. Every name landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through the silence. Once, when Sweetu sat beside her trying to coax her into a few sips of water, Auntie smiled faintly and said,
Such bright rains today.
Then her eyelids fluttered shut again. Her breathing was even, but her gaze, whenever she opened her eyes, kept drifting to the ceiling, pupils tracking invisible movement like she was watching shadows crawl across the plaster.
She keeps talking about trains.
Sweeto murmured to me later, rubbing her temples.
But there's no station anywhere near here.
There doesn't need to be, I said quietly. Not anymore. That didn't comfort her. Grandma, on the other hand, had gone the opposite direction. She sat rooted in her armchair by the window, wrapped in a thick shawl despite the humid air, her fingers sliding across her rosary beads with mechanical calm. Every few minutes, she whispered something under her breath, a low rhythm that felt halfway between prayer and prophecy. I'd started writing them down. The words came out disjointed, as if pulled from dreams.
The eye remembers what the heart forgets. The mirror lies only to those who look twice. The bridge bends when the watcher wakes.
Each line sent a subtle chill up my spine. Too specific, too deliberate to be the ramblings of an old woman. I flipped through my notebook, trying to map their meaning, tracing connections between phrases like I was piecing together a spell in reverse. Sanjeevni leaned against the doorway, nursing her third cup of coffee.
No offense, but Grandma's really committing to her cryptic oracle era.
Kia, lounging on the arm of the chair, flicked her tail with clear disdain.
At least she's making sense.
Her voice purred in my head.
Half the humans I meet just pray for better Wi-Fi.
I stifled a smile. You're not helping. Sweetu shot me a look.
Don't tell me the cat's being snarky again.
She's being herself, I said diplomatically.
Which is snarky.
Sanjeevni muttered.
Honestly, if this was a movie, she'd have her own sarcastic theme music.
Kia yawned, stretching luxuriously.
And better lighting.
She added.
I don't look nearly as dramatic enough in this humidity.
I rolled my eyes. Noted. Sweetu slumped into the chair opposite Grandma, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her skirt.
It's getting worse, isn't it?
She asked softly.
The house feels heavier. Even the air.
It's not the house, I said, scribbling another note beside Grandma's last riddle. It's the tether. The closer we get to understanding it, the thinner the veil gets. Sanjeevni sighed.
You realize how insane you sound, right?
I know. I glanced up, meeting her gaze. I also know the last time I ignored insane, something drowned me. That shut her up for a moment. Kia's eyes gleamed gold in the half-light.
She's not wrong,
she said.
The air tastes wrong, like something old trying to breathe again.
I nodded faintly, though my stomach twisted. The feeling was unmistakable now. The faint vibration under the floorboards, the pulse of something ancient stretching its limbs after a long, hungry sleep. Grandma's voice rose again, soft but clear.
The one who sees all will seek the one who listens.
I stopped writing. That line wasn't just a riddle. It was a warning. The living room had transformed into a war room by noon. Every surface was covered, sigils scrawled in chalk, salt rings half complete, sheets of paper covered in diagrams and notes that only barely made sense to anyone except me. The faint smell of incense mingled with the sharper tang of copper and burnt camphor. Grandma's riddles had become blueprints, their cryptic poetry slowly revealing a pattern. Sweetu and Sanjeevni hovered nearby, listening as I talked through what I'd pieced together. The eye remembers what the heart forgets, I said, tracing a sigil on the table. That's not a metaphor. It's instruction. We're dealing with something that feeds on perception, on being seen. If we look directly at it, we strengthen it. So we'll use reflection wards, silver and salt, mostly, to turn its sight back on itself. Sweetu nodded, face pale but determined.
Like binding it?
Exactly. Temporarily. I said, the bridge it's using is emotional. It latched on through memory, through pain. We need to anchor everyone in the present. No looking back. No calling names of the dead. Sanjeevni gave a half-nervous laugh.
Cool. No reminiscing about exes. Got it.
Sanjeevni, I said, glancing at her, this isn't a joke. Her expression sobered immediately.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
She ran a hand through her hair, staring at the scattered charms.
You realize how weird it is that I'm seriously discussing ghost proofing an apartment, right?
Kia, perched on the dining table like an omen with a tail, flicked her ear.
Welcome to Tuesday.
She muttered. I snorted before I could help it. She says it's just another Tuesday. Sweetu smirked faintly.
You're enjoying this too much, Q.
Kia's tail swished lazily, her tone dry as ash.
Someone has to maintain morale.
She says someone has to keep morale up. I translated, double-checking the salt ring. Sweetu rolled her eyes.
Of course she does.
I ignored their banter, checking the words one by one. Copper thread, iron coin, salt, every protection charm I knew. The practical kind, the ancient kind, the ones that came from whispers rather than books. My hands moved automatically, calm but focused. Beneath the surface, my heartbeat had a new rhythm. Faster, steadier, almost resolute. For the first time, everyone took it seriously. Sanjeevni followed my instructions without sarcasm, grinding dried neem leaves into powder for the threshold wards. Sweetu stitched small sigils into strips of red cloth for binding. Even Grandma seemed lucid enough to hum something low and rhythmic that made the air tremble faintly. The house wasn't ready, but we were getting there. By late afternoon, exhaustion had settled into our bones. Sweetu finally stood, rubbing her temples.
The kids.
She said suddenly, eyes widening.
I promised I'd help them with their masks today. They'll be waiting.
You're still going? I asked, surprised. She hesitated.
They're just kids, Ipsha. They've already seen me cancel too many things. Maybe pretending everything's normal for an hour wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Before I could argue, Sanjeevni grabbed her jacket.
I'm coming too. Someone's got to make sure you don't start teaching them how to summon spirits with glitter glue.
Sweetu managed a weak smile.
You're the one who'd end up summoning a mess.
As they left, Kia hopped off the table and stretched.
They'll be fine.
She said,
Children carry light better than adults. They won't feel the dark pressing in.
I nodded absently, my hands busy etching one final sigil on the window ledge. When the door clicked shut behind them, silence reclaimed the apartment. For the first time in days, I sat down, really sat, and just breathed. The weight of the coming night pressed against me like an invisible hand. I closed my notebook, staring at the faint outline of my reflection on the glass. Kia padded closer, her footsteps making no sound. She leaped up onto the arm of the sofa, tail curling around her paws.
You're thinking like a guardian now.
That stopped me cold. What do you mean?
Planning before reacting. Protecting before striking. You've learned faster than most humans do.
I blinked at her. That almost sounded like a compliment.
It was,
She said, her golden eyes unusually soft.
Don't let it go to your head. You still smell like fear and coffee.
I laughed quietly. And there she is again. She gave me a feline shrug.
Balance, Ipsha. Can't have too much sincerity. It ruins the mystique.
We stayed like that for a while, the cat and the listener, watching the slow bleed of sunset into dusk. Somewhere outside, a group of children were laughing, their voices distant but alive. For a fleeting second, the world felt almost normal. But normal never lasts. Sleep didn't come easy that night. It hovered at the edges of my consciousness, restless and shallow, like a tide that refused to turn. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the hum of something vast beneath the surface, the pull of a current that wasn't water but memory. And somewhere in that fragile half-dream, I felt him, a pulse in the air that resonated deep in my bones. I sat up, the sheets clinging damp to my skin, and for a second the apartment was too quiet. No ticking clock, no rustle of curtains, even the distant hum of the city seemed to have paused, as though the world itself was listening. I slipped out of bed, moving through the dark hallway on instinct, drawn by that familiar static shimmer that always preceded his arrival. He was on the balcony. Not across the street this time, not a mirage in the sodium haze, but standing beneath the soft wash of moonlight, his red shirt now a muted rust, his outline thinner, translucent at the edges. The coolie, my guardian, the man who had always stood between the living and the lost. "You're fading," I said quietly, stepping closer to the railing. My breath came out in pale mist. He nodded once, a weary movement that carried the weight of centuries.
"The closer he comes, the weaker the bridge grows,"
he said.
"You feel it, don't you? The world thinning around you?"
I swallowed, my fingers curling around the iron railing. Every second. His gaze found mine, calm and steady, despite the way his form flickered, each breath of wind threatening to erase him.
"Then you must be ready, listener. You know now what he feeds on."
"Sight," I said. "Attention. Being seen." Something softened in his expression. Pride, or maybe relief.
"Good. Then you also know how to starve him."
I frowned. "You said before, he feeds on perception. How do I make the world stop seeing him?" He tilted his head slightly, his eyes reflecting the fog-muted city lights.
"You don't,"
he muttered.
"You blind him. Turn his eye inward. Make him see himself as he truly is."
It hit me then, the echo of his earlier warnings, the patterns in Grandma's riddles, all pointing toward this. "That's how you sealed him before." His voice grew quieter, but the emotion in it deepened, carrying that rare human ache.
"Yes. With mirrors, reflection, and blood. I made him witness his own hunger until it consumed itself. And when he screamed my name, I thought I'd buried him forever.
His face tightened, a shadow of guilt crossing it.
But someone remembered him. Someone whispered his name again. And I'm paying the price."
The wind shifted, and his form blurred again, thinning into light. The sound that followed wasn't footsteps or breath. It was the faint rattle of a train passing through fog. Far away, but too close to ignore. "Wait," I said sharply. "You keep talking about balance and bridges. Grandma keeps saying the bridge bends when the watcher wakes. What does that mean?"
"You are the bridge, Ipsha,"
he said, his voice fading into a whisper that trembled against the wind.
"You stand between remembering and forgetting. Keep your balance, or both sides fall. And if I cannot return, know that my part of the bridge ends here."
Something in the way he said my name, soft, weighted, final, made the air hitch in my throat. There was a stillness to him now, the kind people wear when they've already decided to leave. His gaze lingered on me, a heartbeat too long, full of quiet pride and an ache that felt older than time itself. I shook my head, the cold stinging my eyes. "No," I whispered. "You don't get to say that like it's goodbye." He smiled faintly, the kind that carried centuries of sorrow.
Goodbyes are only for the living, listener.
His voice faltered as his outline flickered.
We are simply changing distance.
"Don't," I said sharply, stepping forward. "You can't leave me now. Not when he's this close. You said you'd help me stop him."
I have.
He murmured, eyes full of that impossible gentleness.
I've shown you how. The rest? The rest was always yours to finish.
My chest tightened. "Then I'll finish it. Tomorrow I'll end this. I'll send him back to wherever he crawled out from, and I'll make sure he never touches you again." His expression softened, pride, grief, something like gratitude all tangled together.
That's why you were chosen.
He said,
Not because you see, but because you refuse to look away.
The light flickered once across his face, fading fast now, his edges unraveling like smoke. "Wait," I blurted, desperation cracking through my voice. "You can't go yet. Tell me your name. Please, But he was already dissolving like in water. For a heartbeat, his eyes, kind, knowing, infinite, lingered. Then they vanished, leaving only the ghost of a nod, an unspoken promise, and the faint scent of sandalwood and iron curling through the night air. I stood there long after he was gone, the cold pressed against my skin, the silence humming with something vast and unseen. Behind me, the house slept uneasily, walls creaking, air heavy with waiting. Tia padded softly onto the railing beside me, her fur haloed by the dim light. Her voice was quieter than usual, stripped of her usual mockery.
He's right, you know.
I didn't turn. "About what?"
Tomorrow,
she said.
the world will look at what it fears. That's how your festivals work. Masks, lights, laughter. Fear disguised as celebration. But that much attention? That's a feast for something like him.
My chest tightened. "So, we can't stop the city from celebrating," I murmured almost to myself. "But maybe we can control what it's looking at." Kia's tail brushed against my hand, not teasing this time, but grounding.
You're finally walking the bridge.
She said softly.
Just don't forget which side you want to end up on.
I smiled faintly, though it didn't reach my eyes. Guess we both have our jobs cut out for tomorrow. When I finally turned back to go inside, I took one last look at the fog-soaked street below. The lamplight flickered once, a soft, final heartbeat, and then went out completely, swallowed by the dark. Tomorrow's Halloween. The veil between worlds would thin. The watchers would wake, and somewhere between sight and shadow, something was already watching back. Halloween morning didn't so much arrive as unfold, like a curtain drawn back by a reluctant hand. Bhuvaneshwar stirred with its usual festival buzz, children already shouting from balconies, neighbors comparing decorations, early morning vendors announcing their wares with voices that somehow managed to slip through closed windows. But inside the Nayak apartment, the air felt strangely insulated from the world outside. Heavy, metallic, like the rooms were filled not with oxygen, but with the aftertaste of something ancient exhaling through the walls. Light struggled to settle where it normally clung easily. Each sunbeam looked pale and exhausted, coming in through the curtains in thin ribbons rather than wide pools. Even the dust motes seemed slow, drifting like they too felt the weight of what the day would hold. Downstairs, though, normalcy tried its best to resurrect itself. The courtyard looked like someone had spilled a box of crayons and let the chaos arrange itself. Orange and black streamers trembled from window grills. Paper ghosts bobbed uncertainly on bits of tape. Kids ran in zigzags across the uneven tiles, some in half-done costumes, some wearing only the enthusiasm of the day, all buzzing around Sweetu, who sat on a plastic stool like a very tired deity of face paint and patience. Her hands moved with unexpected steadiness as she dabbed green paint on a little boy dressed as a zombie policeman. He could barely stand still. Every time she tried to add a scar on his cheek, he giggled so violently the paintbrush wobbled off course. She didn't scold him. She just exhaled softly, forced a thin smile, and steadied his chin again. Around her, a miniature civilization of Halloween chaos expanded by the minute. A witch with a crooked hat kept tripping over her broom. Another child, possibly trying to be a mummy, wandered around wrapped in toilet paper that unraveled with every step, like a tragic parade float. Some teenagers worked half-heartedly on the stage backdrop, arguing about where to place the lights and whether a pumpkin cutout should be cute scary or actual scary. One particularly stubborn mother tied bat-shaped balloons to every vertical surface, trees, pillars, someone's slipper left outside. And reigning over all this was Sanjeevani. She stood with the authority of a schoolteacher who had seen too much and survived everything with caffeine and spite. Her hands were on her hips, her voice sharp enough to slice through noise.
Arun, if that sword so much as grazes another child, I swear I'll replace it with a math book.
Two boys froze mid-duel.
You!
She snapped at a pair of girls climbing a plastic chair.
Get down before physics teaches you a painful lesson. Down!
The girls scrambled off. Sweetu hid a small laugh behind her paintbrush.
You're terrifying, Sanju.
Sanjeevani sniffled.
Order is the foundation of civilization.
You sound like someone's grandmother.
I take that as a compliment.
From the balcony above, I watched the scene like an outsider peering into a snow globe, bright, swirling, self-contained, utterly unaware of the fissure running beneath its surface. Kia lounged beside me on the railing, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws. Her golden eyes followed the movement downstairs with the aloof judgment of a creature who had witnessed both eldritch horrors and toddlers throwing tantrums, and found toddlers worse. Well, I said softly, leaning against the railing. They're doing a decent job pretending life isn't tilting sideways. Kia didn't bother looking at me.
Pretending,
She echoed.
is humanity's favorite ritual. You dress fear in colors, drown dread in noise, and call it celebration.
Is that an actual supernatural insight? I muttered, or just you being poetic again. She finally turned her head unimpressed.
Poetry and truth get along better than you think, Ipsha.
I sighed. Everything you say sounds like it belongs on a cursed greeting card. Her whiskers twitched in amusement.
I'd buy that card.
My focus drifted back downward. What unsettled me most wasn't the decorations or the noise. It was Sweetu. Her smile was stretched thin, her posture subtly curled inward. Every now and then, when the kids got too loud or the sunlight hit the courtyard wrong, her eyes darted to the shadows beneath the banyan tree. She was trying so hard to be present, but the tremor in her fingertips gave her away. Ever since last night, the ring, the truth she didn't want to voice, something in her had splintered. And in the corner of my awareness, The bridge hummed weakly, a throbbing pulse under my skin, a reminder that the coolie's words weren't warnings, they were countdowns. When the courtyard finally thinned out for lunch and the laughter faded into tired chatter, I went back inside. The apartment felt warmer now, but the warmth was deceptive, like a candle trying to fight a blizzard. The wooden box containing the ring sat on the low table, its carved lid catching the muted light. Every time I glanced at it, my stomach tightened. I laid out the final wards on the floor, salt circles, iron coins, sigils meant to bind sight and twist perception. My hands weren't trembling, not anymore. They moved with the kind of steady focus that comes when fear shifts into responsibility, into resolve. Behind me, Kia curled up on the sofa, uncharacteristically silent. She watched me with an intensity that made the air feel heavier, as if she was measuring not the ritual, but me. After a long while, she finally spoke, her voice soft against my thoughts.
You're shaking.
No, I'm not, I whispered automatically. She tilted her head.
Not from fear, from something else.
I paused, letting the moment settle. Anticipation? A slow blink. Understanding. I smiled faintly. She didn't return it. Her expression only grew more solemn.
The bridge thins, Ipsha.
She murmured.
When bridges break, nothing crosses. Everything falls.
A coldness spread across my shoulders, slow and deliberate, like ink bleeding through paper. I know, I whispered. The goalie warned me too.
Yes.
She said, curling her tail around her paws.
And he wasn't speaking in metaphors.
The room went still. Outside, faint sounds filtered through the window. The laughter of children, the rustle of props, the preparations far below. But beneath that, I heard something else. A low, distant hum, like a train far away, like a watchful breath in the dark. Ekaksha was awake, waiting, and downstairs they were unknowingly building a stage of reflective surfaces, mirrors, tinsel, glittering costumes, the perfect banquet for something that fed on sight, the perfect trap for a creature born of perception, and tonight the world would be watching. Evening settled over the apartment courtyard like a heavy brocade shawl, warm if you didn't look closely, but interwoven with something darker, a thread of unease that tugged gently beneath the surface. Children darted across the compound in costumes that ranged from objectively adorable to aggressively homemade, the kind that relied more on parental optimism than actual craft. Paper ghosts shivered on wires strung between building balconies, their white shapes catching the last scraps of sunlight. Plastic bats turned lazily on their strings. LED fairy lights blinked with that overeager enthusiasm only festival decorations possess, strobing in jittery bursts as though unable to contain their excitement. Somewhere a speaker blared a Halloween remix of some spooky Bollywood song, loud enough to be funny at first and then gradually irritating. The sort of sound that could wake the dead not through horror but sheer annoyance. The children's costume contest was already underway. The stage, a Frankenstein creation of plywood sheets and aluminium scaffolding, bathed in a warm floodlight glow. Someone had attempted to give it the Hollywood Halloween runway treatment, which resulted in a charming but slightly concerning mashup of crepe paper, blinking pumpkin lights, and a glitter bomb that had detonated prematurely. The kids didn't care. They paraded down the ramp with unshakable confidence, each one convinced they were starring in a film. A pint-sized Dracula sucked on a lollipop with the same gravitas his cinematic ancestors reserved for centuries-old vendettas. A zombie princess repeatedly tripped over her own trailing gown, yet maintained her royal dignity. A werewolf, basically a child with cotton stuck to his cheeks, refused to stop howling, convinced the role demanded method acting. His parents winced each time he did it, clearly regretting their decision. Sweetu knelt at the edge of the stage, surrounded by a small army of brushes, face paints, safety pins, and tissues. She worked with the soft efficiency, coaxing children to tilt their faces while dabbing scars, adjusting horns, fixing sashes, and sprinkling glitter with the practiced air of someone who had done this many times before and even enjoyed it. Her face bore exhaustion, but also a fragile warmth, the kind that stayed even when a person's mind was frayed. Behind her hovered Sanjeevni with a clipboard barking directions that bounced across the courtyard with impressive authority. She alternated between yelling at toddlers,
No, you can't eat the fake eyeballs, those are props.
and chasing older kids who kept stealing props.
Sidhu, stop hitting the mummy with the broom. That's not a game.
Her attempts at control only heightened the absurdity of the evening in exactly the way a festival demanded. Several parents clustered around the floodlights and backdrop. Someone readjusted extensions, someone plugged and unplugged wires repeatedly, hoping divine intervention would improve the connection. The giant LED screen at the back played a looping montage of Halloween animations. Floating jack-o'-lanterns, drifting fog, exaggerated lightning strikes, and cartoon bats that pretended to screech. Arjun, the resident tech enthusiast armed with a laptop that had more mood swings than a hormonal ghost, monitored everything from his little control table. He stood there as proud as a man conducting a light show for a stadium concert. Up on the balcony, I leaned against the railing while Kia perched beside me with the serene disdain of a cat who believed the world could be improved by giving her absolute authority. From our vantage point, the courtyard shimmered with gold, orange, and flickering neon. Laughter ricocheted between the buildings. The smell of popcorn mingled curiosity with sandalwood incense drifting from someone's window. The atmosphere should have felt safe, warm, wholesome, like a neighborhood festival always does. But something inside me was quietly coiling inwards. The air felt too charged, like invisible static was gathering in invisible corners.
You're tense.
Kia remarked, her voice sliding into my mind with her usual clipped amusement. Her tail flicked lazily.
Even your aura smells wired.
My aura smells wired? I muttered, too on edge to fully question her wording.
Yes,
She said with a sniff.
like overheated copper. Very unbecoming. Mortals should strive for lavender or sage. Something soft, something subtle. You're giving telegraph pole.
I didn't have the energy to argue. The hum under my skin, the one that had been flickering for days, was stronger now. A low, persistent vibration that thrummed like a plucked sitar string waiting to snap. It came in brief pulses, almost rhythmic, almost sentient, each one a reminder that the coolie's parting words were less cryptic metaphor and more looming warning.
You stand between remembering and forgetting.
Every time a child stepped into a pool of mirrored light, every time tinsel caught a stray beam, every time sequins scratched reflections across the cement floor, I felt Ekaksha watching from somewhere unnervingly close. Mirrors, reflections, flashing surfaces, beautiful to humans, dangerous to everything else. We should be downstairs, I said quietly.
We should be in therapy.
Kia countered.
But here we are, watching discount zombies and small humans shed glitter like dandruff.
She was not wrong. Eventually, Sweetu yelled up at me to come help because some kid had gotten glitter in his eye again and someone else had broken a fake pumpkin. I sighed, scooped Kia into my arms. She protested through every second and made my way down to the courtyard. Up close, everything felt brighter, louder, sharper. The crowd buzzed with excitement, lights reflected off painted faces. The stage pulsed with noisy life. Yet, under all that colour, something else gnawed, something stretched thin and waiting. And then, without warning, the first crack appeared. The speakers went abruptly silent mid-song, cutting off the dramatic crescendo in a way that was genuinely offensive to anyone with rhythm. Arjun stared at his laptop like it had betrayed a sacred oath and slapped the side of it in a move that screamed, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but maybe violence will help."
What nonsense,
he muttered.
It was working a second ago.
A burst of harsh static bellowed through the speaker so violently that the children clamped their hands over their ears and several parents winced. Then, before anyone could process the sudden auditory assault, something else wormed its way through the speakers. A deep, guttural sound that began as a snarl, rolled into a rasp, and then unfurled into unmistakable laughter. Not the cute, witchy Halloween kind that plays in fancy cafes. Not a recorded sound effect. Not anything human. It was laughter with jagged teeth. Something raw. Something hungry. Something wrong. It slithered through the speakers like smoke finding cracks beneath a door. The LED screens flickered violently, strobing in harsh white bursts before blacking out entirely. Floodlights dimmed and surged unpredictably. Shadows elongated unnaturally across the courtyard, sliding like dark oil stretching over tile. Then came the smoke. A thick, rolling cloud billowed from behind the stage, not generated by any machine, not drifting like mist, but coiling deliberately, as though something inside it was alive and choosing its path. The crowd froze. Even the werewolf kid stopped howling mid-sound. Laughter died. Breath caught. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward the stage. From within the wall of smoke, a silhouette stepped forward. A hooded figure, cloaked in black robes heavy enough to belong to an exorcist from a forgotten century. His face was hidden. His gait was steady, purposeful. He moved with eerie calm, as though the chaos around him was simply an audience waiting for his performance. In his hand, he held something small, metallic, round, cruelly bright under the flickering lights. His voice followed like a cold wind through dead leaves. A chant, low, ancient, the kind of sound that doesn't just echo in your ears, but creeps down your spine and roots itself deep. Sweetu sucked in a sharp breath. Kia's back arched, her fur bristling like electricity. My chest tightened with dread. Before any of us could react, the figure hurled the object straight into the central LED screen. The glass shattered in a burst of sparks, fragments scattering like shooting stars across the floor. The hooded figure spun sharply, cloak whipping behind him, and bolted for the exit.
Hey!
Sanjeevani yelled, already in motion. She sprinted after him, her sneakers pounding against the cement, her determination only slightly hindered by the fact that she was yelling things like,
Come back here, you discount Dracula!
She nearly caught him too, managing to seize a corner of the sleeve beneath his robe. The fabric tore in her hand as the figure fled into the shadows of the building, disappearing with impossible speed. Chaos erupted instantly. Parents grabbed their children, kids screamed and shrieked, floodlights flickered like frantic heartbeats. I ran toward the shattered screen, Kia bounding beside me like a dark arrow, Sweetu stumbling after us in shock. The object lay half buried under the shards of glass. When I lifted it, the world seemed to close around me. It was that cursed locket, the one we buried, the one we sealed, the one we prayed we'd never see again. Its cracked glass pulsed violently, as though a heartbeat thrashed against the metal casing. The reflection inside it twisted, spiraling into a shape that made absolutely no sense until the air tore. A seam opened in reality, and something stepped through. Ekaksha slid into existence the way a shadow might rise if it suddenly remembered it once had bones. The air around the courtyard thickened, soft at first like warm tar, then tightening into something that felt disturbingly alive. Darkness gathered itself in the center of the broken stage, not forming a body so much as rejecting the idea of one, twisting, swelling, collapsing upon itself in unnatural spirals, every movement wrong in the way a nightmare is wrong, even before you can explain why. Where a face should have been, there was only a single burning eye suspended in the void, glowing with a pallid white heat that pulsed in time with the locket's sickening rhythm. The watcher did not stand so much as hover, its presence pressing against the skin with the weight of 1,000 unseen gazes. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Children screamed in shrill, stuttering pitches that clawed at the cement walls. Parents lurched forward in pure instinct, grabbing their kids by the wrists or shoulders and dragging them away. The floodlights flickered in panicked bursts, turning every movement into a jagged strobe of fear. The smell of ozone, burnt wires, and something older, something like scorched memory, flooded the air. Sweetu and Sanjeevani sprang into motion without hesitation, pulling people back, shouting instructions, pushing through the frantic tide of limbs. Their terror sharpened into a kind of urgent clarity as they shoved the first group of residents toward the stairwell. Sweetu's voice, usually soft and measured, cracked across the courtyard with fierce command as she shouted for everyone to get upstairs, herding them like a one-woman evacuation team. Sanjeevani, fierce and unyielding, grabbed 2 teenagers frozen in place and practically hauled them bodily towards safety. But I couldn't move. Ekaksha's eye found me with terrifying precision, as though every reflection in the courtyard pointed toward me like an arrow. The cracked screens, though dead moments ago, flickered to life again with a hideous stutter. Their shattered surfaces acted as fractured mirrors, each one showing a distorted sliver of that single eye, repeating and compounding the horror like a kaleidoscope of dread. His voice slithered through every screen, layered and jagged, echoing in frequencies a human throat should not produce.
You see me because you were made to. You called me with your sight, listener.
The words slid through my ribs like cold fingers. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, to run, to hide, but the bridge inside me thrummed with a pulse that held me still. I forced my feet forward, every step feeling like it pressed into the thin skin of a world stretched too tight. The wards in my hand burned hot, painfully so, and I hurled the first spiral of protection across the cracked concrete. Light unfurled in a widening arc, forging shimmering circles that fought desperately against the shadow that blurred outward from Ekaksha's form. The ground beneath him rippled as though rejecting his presence. But his influence reached into every reflective surface, each shard of broken LED screen, each strip of glossy tinsel, each lingering puddle from the afternoon rain. Every reflection gave him shape, every glint gave him form. Kia exploded into motion, darting across the courtyard with a grace so sharp it seemed impossible for anything with fur. She leaped between reflections with uncanny precision, her paws landing on cracked screens, broken jars, metal railing, anything that mirrored even a sliver of light. She used her claws like scalpel blades, striking each surface with swift, targeted aggression. Every mirror shattered weakened him. Every mirror that remained bolstered him like a pillar. Ekaksha laughed. It wasn't sound. It wasn't vibration. It was the sensation of glass cracking inside the skull, a jagged echo that made the edges of the world blur. His shadow lashed outward in tendrils, tearing through my wards as if they were thin cloth. One of the strikes slammed hard against my chest, sending me sprawling backward. My spine hit the concrete with bruising force, and pain shot down my arm in a hot electric stab. When I lifted my hand, I saw blood welling from a sharp cut in my palm. The drop slid off my skin, slow and heavy, and fell onto a shard of broken mirror lying near my shoulder. The reflection within that shard twisted instantly, stretching, shrinking, spiraling like oil swirling in poison. In that broken piece of glass, I saw Ekaksha's eyes flare brighter, feeding not on strength or power, but on attention, on sight, on the act of being witnessed. My heart stuttered. The air around me tightened with a crushing force, as if invisible hands had wrapped around my ribs. And then, just when the world seemed ready to fold inward, a voice sliced through the static.
Hold your ground, listener. Do not close your eyes.
The voice was soft, gentle, firm, like the strength of someone who had stood beside storms for centuries and learned how to whisper into them. Light blossomed beside me, not harsh or binding, but warm and steady like a lantern held by someone returning from a long journey. I turned, breath catching, as the coolie stepped into view. His form flickered wildly, fighting dissolution with every second, but he stood tall. Even the shadows seemed to recoil from him. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Those who fled upstairs could still see his faint outline from the balcony. A man wrapped in old railway red, hovering between life and memory, his presence soft but undeniable. "Ah, Kia!" I choked out, struggling to push myself up. "Break the rest! All of them!" Kia didn't waste a heartbeat. With a fierce hiss, she launched herself into motion again, darting across broken metal, shattered acrylic, and bending reflections. She moved like a streak of shadow, fur glowing faintly gold under the coolie's light. The coolie lifted a trembling hand, and light spilled from his palm like a cracked sunrise. It arced outward in a perfect curve, forming a half circle of brilliance around us, an echo of the barrier he once used to seal Ekaksha long ago. I scrambled to my feet and instinctively completed the circle using what remained of the reflective shards, aligning them with trembling hands. Ekaksha recoiled, but only for a moment, because I understood then, with a clarity that felt carved into bone, it wasn't enough. The circle was strong, the wards were strong. The coolie was holding reality together by the sheer force of will from a fading soul. But Ekaksha was stronger still, empowered by every terrified eye that had seen him tonight. My heartbeat steadied into something cold, heavy, resolute. "I have to invite him," I said, breath trembling. The coolie didn't flinch. His expression held sorrow and pride in equal measure, as if he had feared this truth, but also expected me to find it.
You know what must be done.
I stepped into the center of the circle with the slow, deliberate resolve of someone who already knew the cost and had silently agreed to pay it. The world around me throbbed with a strange, brittle tension, the kind that appears only at the very edge of something irreversible. My heartbeat felt mismatched from my body, thudding in my ears like someone knocking insistently on a locked door. I lifted my chin, feeling the weight of Ekaksha's gaze settle over me like a cloak woven from ice and anger. My throat was parched, but my voice emerged steady, almost eerily calm, as if another version of me stood behind my bones guiding the words. Then take me, if that's what you want. See what you've made. For a moment, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath, and then he moved. Ekaksha surged forward in a single fluid motion that made the shadows behind him curl like frightened animals. His single eye expanded into a cavernous void, stretching impossibly wide, swallowing the strobe of light, the flutter of banners, the reflection of shattered screens. The darkness that poured from him wasn't emptiness. It was awareness, ancient and ravenous, a vision that saw everything without mercy or hesitation. His presence wrapped around my chest with the cold precision of a blade dipped in fire. There was no physical pain, but the sensation of being seen so completely, down to the rawest parts of myself, stole the air from my lungs. He saw my memories, peeling through them like pages of a book he had written himself. He saw the childhood fears I still carried in corners of my mind I never visited anymore. He saw my doubts, the ones that whispered at 3 a.m. that I wasn't enough, that my choices were foolish, that I was stumbling blind in a world built from secrets. He saw my attachments, every person I cared for, every mistake I had buried, every piece of longing I kept hidden under jokes and bravado. He saw my arrival in Bhuvaneshwar, the coolie's hand reaching for mine, my refusal to look away from the uncanny. He devoured all of it with the greedy delight of a creature starving since the dawn of time. And still, I didn't flinch. Around us, the coolie braced against the strain, his fading form flickering violently with each pulse of Ekaksha's hunger. The light he cast was fragile but determined. A trembling glow stretched thin across the mirror circle. Cracks appeared in the concrete beneath him. Fissures branching outward like veins of light, fighting to break through the earth. He was burning everything he had left to keep the circle intact. His voice cut through the suffocating dark, still gentle, still steady, even now.
Now, Ipsha, don't look away.
My lungs burned, my vision wavered. The world around us spiraled in and out of focus as though the courtyard existed only because I insisted it did. I forced my tongue to move, pushing the words out into the collapsing air. See yourself. The moment the words left my mouth, every mirror shard ignited in blinding unity, a sudden violent chorus of light. Ekaksha's eye snapped toward the reflections involuntarily, dragged by an ancient instinct older than language. And when the mirror showed him not distortions or fragments, but countless, unceasing replications of his true form, a watcher who had abandoned his purpose, a guardian who had turned greed into identity, a being who had carved hunger out of envy and mistaken it for evolution. One reflection became two. 2 became 10, 10 became 100, 100 became a storm of truths he could not escape. In each mirror, his eye stared back at itself, hollow, monstrous, stripped of grandeur. A record of everything he had consumed, a tally of every life he had hollowed, a reminder of the brother he had betrayed. He recoiled, but the mirrors held him fast. Then he screamed. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a rupture, a tearing of the world's skin, a cry that rattled the lights until they burst overhead in a shower of sparks. The air itself reached its breaking point, folding inward, warping, then snapping back with a thunderous implosion that made the earth vibrate beneath our feet. Shadows twisted like torn fabric caught in a storm. The courtyard shuddered, shivering under the weight of a dying nightmare. And then, silence. A deep, aching silence that felt like the absence of a heartbeat. Ekaksha collapsed inward, dissolving like ash caught in an invisible wind. His single eye flickered once, a dim, sorrowful pulse before fading into nothing at all. The darkness loosened its grip, the weight lifted, the world exhaled. Only then did I realize the coolie was still standing, barely. He remained at the edge of the circle, a fragile shape composed entirely of willpower. Light clung to him in thin threads, unraveling more with every second. He was translucent, as if someone had drawn him in pencil and begun erasing the outlines. I staggered toward him, each step heavy, my legs trembling with the exhaustion of a war fought on too many fronts. Physical, emotional, spiritual. My throat tightened painfully. "You did it," I whispered, my voice cracking on its own weight. "We did it. Please, don't go yet." He smiled, faint, weary, heartbreakingly gentle. It was the expression of someone who had seen centuries of suffering and still chose kindness every time.
You no longer need me, listener.
He murmured, his voice softer than fog and twice as fleeting.
You are the bridge now, the guardian between what was and what must remain unseen.
"I'm not ready." The words broke out of me in a choked rasp. "You can't leave. I don't even know your name." His outline flickered hard, as if the world tried to erase him faster than he could speak.
My name was Orko.
He whispered.
Remember it only when the world forgets.
"No!" I reached for him desperately, fingers stretching into the dissolving glow. He reached back. For one suspended breath, our hands almost touched, warmth brushing against my fingertips, familiar and steady, as if he were trying to promise something he no longer had time to say. And then he was gone. The light, the warmth, the presence, all of it vanished in a soft collapse of brightness, leaving nothing but cold air and the echo of a memory that already felt too fragile to hold. My knees buckled. The courtyard tilted sideways, and I fell, sobbing before I even realized I had broken apart. The grief tore through me with raw, unrestrained force, not delicate tears, not heroic sorrow, but shaking, gasping, guttural weeping that I couldn't swallow back. Above me, the crowd erupted into cheers, relief washing over them as they assumed the danger was gone, and my collapse was simply the aftermath of victory. They celebrated, they sighed, they clapped. But across the courtyard, Sweetu and Sanjeevani stood frozen, their expressions stricken. Kia pressed against my leg, her small body trembling with the grief she tried to hide behind narrowed eyes. They knew. I wasn't crying because I survived. I was crying because he didn't. When Ekaksha finally collapsed into ash, the courtyard didn't immediately remember how to breathe again. It remained suspended in that strange trembling hush, the kind that settles after a storm but before the world realizes it has survived. The broken reflections that littered the ground shimmered faintly, each shard carrying the dying echo of an eye that had watched too much for too long. The air smelled of iron and ozone, as if lightning had kissed the earth and left a metallic aftertaste on the wind. The Halloween decorations that had once been bright and cheerful now drooped in exhaustion. Paper bats shriveled at the edges, ghosts slumped sideways, and tinsel sagged like wilted vines after a wildfire. The floodlights flickered uneasily, trying to decide whether they still had enough courage to stay on. They buzzed, blinked, and then grudgingly offered a weak trembling glow, the last breath of a party that had nearly turned into a burial. Parents began to bring the children out of hiding, their voices shaky but attempting normalcy. The neighbors clustered in small groups, whispering theories with the frantic eagerness of people desperate for a rational explanation. Short circuit, someone muttered. Electrical failure, someone else insisted. Those rooftop cables, a third concluded triumphantly, as if a frayed wire could explain the shadow that had nearly eaten their minds. Sweetu, Sanjeevani and I gathered ourselves slowly, our bodies still trembling from adrenaline, grief, and the faint imprint of terror. Kia pressed close against my leg, her fur puffed slightly, her tail tucked low, not fearful, but poised protectively as if daring anything unseen to come close. Her golden eyes followed every movement around us, alert in that uncanny way only a creature accustomed to both worlds could be. The courtyard was returning to life, but something about the ground, the scorched fabric, the glinting shards, the faint hum beneath my ribs, told me the story wasn't finished. Not yet. I worked alongside the neighbors, lifting broken plastic chairs that still crackled with residual static, bending the warped stage cloth back into something vaguely rectangular, gathering fallen masks and jagged bits of LED panel that glittered in the floodlights. It was all mechanical, muscle memory more than intention, as if my body had decided to keep moving so my mind didn't have to think too hard about what we had almost lost. My thoughts floated somewhere between numbness and that hollow ache grief leaves behind when it hasn't quite decided what shape it wants to take. My hands moved on autopilot, disposing of fake cobwebs and charred prop skeletons, until something near the corner of the stage snagged the edge of my vision. A small, persistent gleam half buried beneath a pile of tinsel that had been tossed aside in a hurry. At first, I assumed it was just another piece of shattered glass, another casualty of the night's theatrics, but the glint felt wrong, deliberate, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I crouched slowly, my knees protesting, and brushed aside the crinkled coils of metallic paper. The tinsel parted like dry grass, and there it was. The object I had both expected and dreaded, lodged in the dirt as if it had been waiting for me to look down. The cursed locket. The same one the hooded figure had hurled at the screen hours earlier. The same one we'd buried deep at the abandoned signal post, guarded by salt, sealed wards, and the naive hope that it would stay buried. Neighbors had swept the courtyard clean in a panic, dragging debris to the side, but someone had placed the locket back near the base of the stage as if ensuring I wouldn't miss it. It lay cracked open again, the fractured glass glittering like a jagged pupil, the metal still faintly warm to the touch. Its presence felt intentional, daunting, a calling card that hummed with the same quiet tread as a soft knock on a locked door. My chest tightened, and beside it, half hidden in shadow near the stage support where Sanjeevani had almost tackled the hooded figure earlier, something else caught the light, smaller, sleeker, gleaming with a quiet sense of ownership. I reached out, my fingers closing around it, and lifted a cufflink into view. It was a neat, polished piece of silverwork, the kind of thing worn by someone who took their own reflection far too seriously, engraved with a pair of initials that I recognized immediately because I had already seen them carved into metal once before. The same initials as the ring locked in the wooden box upstairs. My stomach dropped with a slow, dense weight, as though someone had poured lead into it. Every instinct I had honed in years of dealing with the supernatural flared, except this time it wasn't pointing at a ghost or a curse. It was pointing at something far more mundane and far more terrifying: intent. Without hesitating, without letting my expression change even a fraction, I slipped both the locket and the cufflink into my pocket. My hand closed around them until my palm prickled with heat, as if my own body was trying to reject the contact. I didn't look at Sweetu. I didn't look at Sanjeevni, not down here, not with the neighbors half laughing, half shaking, trying to convince themselves it had all been an electrical accident and nothing more. They needed their story. This was ours. This truth didn't belong in a courtyard full of people trying to rebuild normalcy out of broken chairs and burnt tinsel. It belonged upstairs, behind a closed door, with only the three of us and a cat who understood far too much. By the time we finally made our way back up to the apartment, the exhaustion had settled into my bones like fine dust after demolition. The familiar corridor felt oddly softer, as if the building itself had exhaled now that the worst was over. Inside, the lights glowed with a warm, unthreatening steadiness, and the faint aroma of lingering incense and reheated food floated through the air, a small, stubborn reminder that life went on even when monsters tried to rip holes in it. For the first time in days, Auntie's eyes looked almost normal. There was still a distant haze there, but it no longer held that glassy, displaced terror. Grandma's breaths were deep and even, her earlier riddles finally giving way to simple, human fatigue. We had a quiet dinner, simple, almost bland, but it tasted better than anything I'd eaten in a week because nobody flinched at shadows during it. Auntie and Grandma spoke little, but their shoulders were less tense, their hands steadier as they held their cups. They finished early and went to bed without protest, Auntie murmuring a tired good night and Grandma giving me a long, narrow look that said she knew more than she would ever say aloud. When their doors clicked shut, the apartment seemed to inhale and then settle into an uneasy but genuine stillness. The living room felt suddenly larger and smaller at the same time. It was just the three of us now. Sweetu curled into one corner of the sofa, blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders like armor that had arrived late to the battlefield. Sanjeevni sprawled across the other end, legs flung out, staring at an indeterminate spot on the wall with the stunned expression of someone whose entire definition of weird needed to be rewritten. I sat between them, elbows resting on my knees, feeling the weight of the night pressing down between my shoulder blades. Kia was a compact, reassuring warmth against my leg, her tail wrapped neatly around herself like a punctuation mark that refused to move until the sentence was properly finished. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick and ritualistic, the hush that settles in temples and train stations just before something important happens. I could feel the locket and cufflink burning quietly inside my pocket, like two coals that knew they were about to start a fire. At last, I drew in a slow breath. "Wait here," I said softly. Both girls looked up, hollow-eyed, exhausted, but neither of them asked why. They didn't need to. They had seen me operate enough in the past few days to know that wait here meant something important was about to walk into the room, whether it had legs or not. I stood, walked to the room I'd been using, and closed the door behind me. The wardrobe creaked faintly as I opened it and reached for the wooden box tucked safely away at the back. The sound of the contents shifting, a small, dull metallic clink, sent a shiver crawling up my spine. I had heard so many awful sounds the last few days, but for some reason that quiet little clink felt the most ominous. When I returned to the living room, the air had changed, heavier and tighter, as though the room itself knew what I was carrying. The moment had arrived, and it had no intention of passing quietly. I set the wooden box down on the center table with more care than it technically needed, my fingers lingering for a second on the lid. The room seemed to inhale with me as the latch clicked open. Nestled inside, cushioned by folded cloth, lay the ring we had dug up from the filthy soil near the signal post. In another life, it might have looked romantic, sleek silver, well finished, familiar initials engraved in a flourish meant to impress. In this life, those same initials felt like a brand. Without breaking eye contact with Sweetu, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cufflink I had just found in the courtyard. I set it down beside the ring. Side by side, they looked like they belonged together. That was the problem. As soon as the cufflink touched the table, the atmosphere shifted, not in the theatrical supernatural way I was used to. No lights dimming, no temperature drops, no whispers at the back of my neck. This was heavier than that, simpler and more devastating. The weight of recognition hanging in the air like a held breath. It was the moment in a ghost story when you realize the real haunting had nothing to do with the dead. Sweetu's reaction was immediate and absolute. Her eyes flew to the objects as if dragged, widening so fast it almost looked painful. Her lips parted on a sound that never made it out, and her chest hitched in a shallow, strangled breath. Terror flashed across her face, followed by shame, followed by heartbreak, not in separate beats but layered, as if all three emotions were trying to exist in the same second. My voice, when I spoke, came out quieter than I expected, but there was no softness in its spine. It was the tone of someone who had already pieced the puzzle together, but was still offering the other person the dignity of saying it first. "Sweetu," I said, "you know who these belong to, right?" She didn't answer. At least not right away. Her gaze darted away from the table as if the ring and cufflink had suddenly become something physically dangerous to look at. Her fingers tightened around the blanket until her knuckles stood out sharp and pale, tendons pulled taut. Her whole body trembled with a barely contained tension, not the flinch of fear, but the deep, shuddering recoil of someone who had been trying very hard not to arrive at the conclusion already sitting in front of her. Across from us, Sanjeevni looked from Sweetu to me and back again, confusion darkening in a more serious kind of dread.
Dee?
She asked, her voice sharper than usual, stripped of its usual sarcasm.
What's going on?
I didn't look away from Sweetu. "You knew," I said quietly, the words landing between us like stones in water. "You knew the moment we found the ring, and you didn't want to tell me." I let the truth sit there for a beat before I added, more gently but no less firmly, "Who is he?" That was the moment something inside her finally snapped. Sweetu's breath hitched so sharply it sounded almost like a sob strangled halfway. Her shoulders caved inward, curling as though she could make herself small enough to disappear. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over in hot, relentless streams before she could even attempt to wipe them away. She tried to speak once, twice, each time managing only a strangled sound. On the third attempt, the words tore free of her like something that had been wedged painfully in her throat for days.
It's Rohit.
She forced out, and the name alone carried a lifetime of conflicting emotions.
Rohit Malik.
The silence that followed landed with physical weight. I felt my jaw clench automatically, my molars grinding against the urge to swear. Next to me, Sanjeevni froze with her mouth half open, shock rippling through her features in an almost visible wave. At my feet, Kia's tail gave a single low flick, not fear this time, but a warning, the kind cats give when they've decided something in the room qualifies as prey. Before I could react, Sanjeevni let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a curse, more a horrified mutter of recognition.
Rohit,
She whispered, eyebrows shooting up.
Mr. Mythology TED Talk. Are you kidding me? That guy was brilliant but completely cracked. I always said he looked like someone who'd lose sleep over a math equation, then forget to eat for 3 days.
Her voice wavered between disbelief and a strange, dawning dread.
I mean, he seemed harmless enough. Eccentric? Sure. Sticky note on the fridge kind of weird. Not summon a demon to end humanity weird.
Sweetu flinched at the nickname, though there was no defensiveness in it. Only heartbreak, the kind that runs deep enough to sting when someone else speaks the truth aloud. Between ragged breaths and breaking voice, Sweetu began to speak in pieces, not a neat explanation, but shattered fragments of a story that had clearly been splintering inside her for days.
He lived just 1 floor below us.
She whispered, each word shaking.
He always helped me with my architecture sketches. He was so kind, so patient. He used to talk about myths of perception, about gods who could see everything. I thought it was just stories, just intellectual nonsense, late night conversations.
She swallowed hard before continuing, voice thinner.
He was a genius, honestly, and filthy rich, but he never acted like it. He didn't mix with anyone, barely attended society gatherings. Most people didn't even realize he lived here. But with me, he was always kind, quiet, soft-spoken. He made everything sound like some grand riddle the universe had left behind for him to solve.
She hesitated, eyes unfocusing as if she were replaying a memory she wished she could burn.
6 months ago, he suddenly packed up everything, just disappeared. No note, no message, nothing. I tried asking, but he only said he had found his purpose and people who would make his dreams come true. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought he was doing that genius thing where they ramble about destiny and meaning.
She shook her head, voice cracking.
I didn't give it much thought. I thought he'd just gone somewhere to research or brood or whatever eccentric geniuses do.
She pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes and sucked in a trembling breath.
I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know I was helping him. And
she swallowed again, guilt tightening every line of her body.
2 months ago, he contacted me out of nowhere. Just a few messages. He asked about symbols and patterns. Said he was working on something important. Something that needed absolute precision. I thought he was just rambling like always.
Her voice cracked further.
When he asked about shapes and patterns and how to design a symbol for pure sight, I thought he was just being dramatic. I didn't think...
Her voice broke completely for a moment.
I didn't think he would do something like this. I didn't want to believe that he could. I cared for him. I trusted him. I thought I'd just misread him. Misread everything. It was easier to believe I was imagining it than to believe he'd use what I gave him to...
She gestured helplessly at the apartment, the courtyard, the world. The guilt in her voice wasn't subtle. It clawed at the air, raw and ugly. She hadn't just been afraid these last few days. She had been suffocating under the idea that she had somehow drawn the monster to her own doorstep and handed it a key. I didn't move to hug her. I didn't reach out. That would come later. Right now, I needed the truth to sit fully in the room, unsoftened, uncut. We had spent days battling a creature made of hunger and reflection. The least we could do for ourselves was reflect honestly on this. And besides, the why didn't belong to her. That answer belonged to Rohit himself, and I had every intention of getting it. So instead, I let the silence thicken, let the shape of the betrayal fully form in our shared awareness. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, feeling my earlier grief gradually harden into something more precise and dangerous. When I finally spoke, my voice came out calm in a way that surprised even me. The evil wasn't the demon, I said, watching the ring and cufflink glow faintly under the overhead light. The evil was the man who thought he could control one. Kia moved then, slinking forward with the kind of quiet that makes you remember cats used to be worshipped for a reason. She pressed her warm body against my ankle, anchoring me to the floor, her eyes soft in a way she rarely allowed. Her voice slipped into my mind like smoke through a crack.
Bridges stand, listener.
She murmured, the nickname suddenly feeling heavier now that Orko was gone.
Even when guardians fall.
My throat tightened around a response I didn't trust myself to say out loud. The ache of losing him, of feeling his presence steer away from mine, sat underneath everything else like a bruise beneath skin. But there was something else forming too, coiling slowly, cold and steady. Whatever Ekaksha had been, he was dust now. Rohit Malik, however, was still very much alive. I stared at the ring and the cufflink, those twin gleaming relics of a betrayal that felt older than the night itself, older than the curse, older even than Ekaksha's hunger. They sat on the table like two quiet confessions, their polished surfaces absorbing the lamplight and throwing it back with a cold, steady gleam that made my skin crawl. They were no longer mere objects. They had shed the skin of jewelry and became something far heavier. They were keys to a door someone should never have unlocked. They were mistakes sealed in silver and left behind by a hand that believed itself untouchable. They were the quiet footprints of someone who had played God with forces that were never meant for mortal ambition. And in that moment, as their meaning settled into my bones, I realized they were also the beginning of a hunt, a path carved not by fate, but by choice, and by the consequences of someone else's arrogance. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the room shift with me, and walked toward the window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips, smoothing the jagged thrum of adrenaline in my blood. Outside, the city shimmered faintly, distant lights blinking through the veil of night, soft pockets of human warmth scattered across the sleeping skyline. Bhuvaneshwar looked deceptively peaceful from the fourth floor, as if it too wanted to pretend nothing terrible had happened in its quiet heart tonight. And then, slicing through the stillness, a train horn echoed across the air. A long, low cry, solemn and protective, like a benediction left behind a guardian who had already stepped into the light. It rolled through the night like a final piece of comfort, a promise that not everything sacred fades without leaving something behind. My jaw tightened until I felt the pressure in my ears. The grief didn't ebb, it settled, sharpening itself into something colder, steadier, more resolute. "Then I'll find him," I whispered, my voice carrying a clarity that scared even me. And this time, I exhaled, steady and controlled. The living will learn to fear what the dead already know. Behind me, the room held its breath, Sweetu wiped her face with trembling fingers, shame and heartbreak clinging to her like a second skin. Sanjeevni sat rigid on the couch, the shock that had frozen her earlier now hardening into a steel-edged determination. Even she, who had joked her way through most of this haunting, wore a seriousness that felt too big for the apartment's small living room. Kia hopped onto the sofa beside me with uncharacteristic gentleness, her paws making no sound on the fabric. She nudged my arm, not with her usual dramatic flair, but with something far softer, almost reverent. Her voice brushed my thoughts like a thread of wind.
I misjudged him at first, you know.
Her words carried none of the sarcasm she usually wielded like a shield.
When he called your name from the balcony that night, I thought he was dangerous. Old crossing spirits can be cruel things, hungry, territorial, unpredictable. I warned you because I assumed he wanted to claim you, bend you, bind you the way corrupted guardians sometimes try to do.
She paused, her golden eyes reflecting the lamplight like twin lanterns in fog.
But he wasn't hunting you,
she murmured.
He was protecting you. He always was. And you cared for him far more deeply than you realized.
Her tail curled lightly around my forearm, a gesture that felt almost human in its tenderness.
That kind of grief,
she whispered.
That kind of bond, it doesn't disappear, Ipsha. It transforms, it shapes, it becomes something new.
My eyes fell closed, lashes trembling, as the truth of her words settled into the hollow place left behind by a guardian who had faded in my arms. And for the first time since Orko vanished into light, the grief didn't crush me, it anchored me. Morning crawled into the Nayak apartment like a reluctant guest. Pale sunlight filtering through the curtains as if it weren't entirely convinced the night had truly passed. None of us had slept properly. The air still carried the metallic aftertaste of the fight, of mirrors cracking open with screams, of light swallowing shadow and leaving behind nothing but ash and grief. But grief or no grief, the world outside insisted on continuing its routine, indifferent to the emotional debris left behind. By the time the clock struck 9, I knew we couldn't delay. Truth had a way of rotting when left untouched, and whatever Rohit had been tangled in or manipulated by wasn't something we could afford to let fester in the shadows. I didn't say it dramatically or ceremoniously. I simply stood up from the table where the remnants of breakfast sat untouched and announced quietly, "We're going downstairs." Sweetu looked as if I'd punched the air out of her. Sanjeevni's eyebrows climbed, preparing to protest, but then fell into a hard, resigned line. Kia said nothing, which was somehow more unnerving than her usual sarcastic commentary, but padded after me with the kind of deliberate determination cats use when they're about to witness something unpleasant. The corridor to Rohit Malik's floor felt colder than it should. Not haunted, not cursed, just still, as if the walls remembered a silence deeper than human quiet. Sweetu hesitated outside his door, fingers trembling slightly before she pulled them back and gestured for me to go ahead. I placed my palm flat against the wood. Dust tickled my skin. The lock was old, rusting, untouched for months, but beneath the surface, hidden between the layers of paint, something carved into the frame pulsed very faintly, like a heartbeat trying to hide. A sigil. It wasn't the amateurish geometric charm of a curious researcher. It wasn't one of the playful pattern studies Sweetu had helped him sketch. This was older, the lines deeper, almost etched rather than carved, an angular pattern that made my eyesight swim if I looked at it too directly. The sigil hummed against my palm, as if recognizing something in me, or warning me off. Kia hissed immediately, tail puffing.
That's old magic.
She muttered, voice low, vibrating with distrust.
Much older than him. This wasn't his doing. Someone taught him. Someone marked this place.
I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, like threaded glass. The key Sweetu reluctantly fished out from her pocket, clicked into the lock with surprising smoothness, as though the door had been waiting. The hinges groaned when we pushed it open, and a wave of cold, stale air greeted us, the kind that belonged to forgotten rooms and unspoken secrets. Dust coated everything in a thin, undisturbed layer, but beneath it lay a precision that made my skin crawl. Rohit's flat was meticulous, not in a clean freak sort of way, but in that obsessive surgical manner that came when someone's mind had been swallowed entirely by one idea and everything else had become irrelevant. Chalk lines covered the floor, spirals intersecting triangles, wheels within wheels of scribbled annotations only visible if you knew how to read desperation. Diagrams that weren't aesthetic, weren't artistic, they were functional. Conduits, vectors, ritual alignments. The walls were worse. Hundreds of sketches in pencil, charcoal, red ink. Eyes in clusters, eyes in rows, eyes distorted through prisms. Eyes drawn within mirrors, mirrors within eyes. Variations of perception Sigil Sweetu must have helped him brainstorm once, back when she thought he was simply exploring visual philosophy. But now they were layered with symbols that were not hers, sharper strokes, different handwriting, unfamiliar geometry. Another hand in his work, another mind shaping his obsession. Stacks of papers lay pinned to corkboards, notes scribbled in English, Sanskrit, Prakrit, and something else entirely. Something angular and alien, more symbol than alphabet. Books lay open on the floor, their pages underlined feverishly. A handful of burnt-out candles fused into saucers, ash circles marking where incense had burned down to nothing. And at the center of the room, dominating everything else, stood a long wooden table transformed into a shrine of intellectual madness. Papers fanned across it like wings, ink-stained tools scattered around the edges, and in the middle, precise, irrefutable, unmistakable, the original sigil, the one Sweetu had helped him create. Only now, fully assembled, it was so much more than a pattern. It was an invocation, a mathematical prayer, a doorway disguised as geometry, and suddenly, with a clarity that struck like cold lightning, I understood. Rohit had not been the architect of corruption. He had been guided into it, fed the stories, handled the symbols, taught the shapes. Someone had shown him where to place his hands, where to draw the lines, where to focus his mind. Someone older, someone patient, someone who knew exactly what they wanted him to build. Rohit Malik had not been the mastermind. He had been the vessel, a brilliant, lonely, misguided vessel used to open a door larger than he ever realized. And now that the door had been opened once, even if we closed it, someone out there knew the listener existed. Someone out there knew the bridge had awakened, and someone out there would try again. The moment we stepped deeper into the apartment, a prickle skittered down my spine. That instinctive tightening of the body that comes not from danger, but from the sense of a presence that doesn't belong, a presence that shouldn't be there. Kia froze first, her ears flattening in a stiff, bristling line.
Something is breathing in this room,
she whispered, voice low enough to be mistaken for thought. Sweetu looked at me sharply, panic already flickering beneath the surface of her eyes.
What's going on?
And then Sanjeevni saw it.
Guys?
She whispered, voice trembling in a way I had never heard from her.
Please tell me that's a mop. Please tell me that's a mop shaped like a man.
But it wasn't. It was him. Rohit was sitting in the far corner of the room, hunched in the shadow between a bookshelf and the chalk patterns on the floor, the darkness clinging to him as if it were afraid to let him go. His body was folded in on itself, knees drawn to his chest, fingers twitching along invisible lines, tracing invisible geometry. For a second, he didn't even register us. His lips moved in constant broken murmurings, like a radio tuning endlessly through ghost stations. I had seen haunted people before, but I had never seen someone haunted by their own mind. His eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, bruised purple and glassy, reflecting nothing, not even the light in front of him. His clothes were the same ones he'd worn under the robe that night he summoned Ekaksha, dusty, wrinkled, stained with soil. The left sleeve torn raggedly where Sanjeevani had ripped it in the chase. The shredded cloth dangled absurdly, like a wound that refused to close. The robe he'd worn last night lay discarded at his feet, a crumpled heap of darkness that still smelled faintly of incense and burnt sage. Sweetu gasped softly, a sound so small it felt like a confession. He looked up, slowly, mechanically, as if it hurt. For a moment, his eyes darted across my face, then Kia, then the walls, as though struggling to match the living to the fading fragments of his memory. But when his gaze finally landed on Sweetu, something inside him cracked.
Sweta?
He whispered, voice trembling, breath hitching. He blinked, as if unsure whether she was real or another hallucination.
You're here. You shouldn't. They said you shouldn't.
His words dissolved into a dry, shaking breath. And then he broke. Not violently, not loudly, but in that terrifying brittle way glass breaks when the slightest pressure touches it. He pressed the heels of his palm against his forehead, rocking slightly.
It wasn't time yet.
He muttered frantically.
It wasn't supposed to happen early. The eye wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. They told me the final ritual needed the bridge.
He stopped abruptly, his gaze jerking toward me. His eyes widened.
You. They meant you.
I didn't move. Sweetu did. She took a shaken step forward.
Rohit,
She whispered, her voice trembling.
why were you there last night? Why did you call that thing?
He flinched so violently, it looked like someone had struck him.
I didn't call him. Not alone. I didn't understand. They said he was a test, a lens, a first sight, a minor eye. They said he'd only look, not devour. I didn't mean for it to reach you.
His voice cracked into a strangled sob.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was being used.
The words hung in the room like cold breath. This was not the voice of a villain, not the voice of a calculating mastermind, but the shattered rambling of a man who had stared too long into something ancient and let it hollow him out. Sanjeevani, whose bravery normally operated at full volume, whispered in a voice barely recognizable as her own.
What the hell is he talking about? Used by who? For what?
Rohit's hands curled into fists, knuckles whitening. He looked at the chalk diagrams around him as though they were maps of betrayal.
The ones who guided me.
He muttered, his voice distant, almost reverent.
The ones who saw me first. They said I had a gift. They said I could restore true sight. They said the world had forgotten how to see. But they didn't tell me the cost. They didn't tell me the eye hungers. They didn't.
His breath faltered again. Then he shuddered, as if the memory itself burned.
I wasn't chosen.
He whispered, barely audible.
I wasn't the first. I was found, and they said the eye sees only through a worthy mind. I wanted to be worthy. I thought.
He let out a sharp, pained laugh that made the hair on my arms rise.
I thought I was finally doing something meaningful. I thought they believed in me. I thought this would make me enough.
Sweetu covered her mouth with both hands, tears slipping through her fingers.
Rohit, stop.
She pleaded.
Please. You're scaring me.
He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him seemed to collapse inward, folding like paper soaked in rain.
I never wanted to hurt you,
he said, voice breaking.
You were the only one who ever heard me, ever listened. I only asked about the sigil because they told me you could see patterns others couldn't.
He glanced around wildly.
I didn't know they'd use it. I didn't know they bind Ekaksha through it. I didn't know they'd mark this floor. I didn't know.
Kia padded forward on silent pause, her tail held low, her eyes sharp with a wary pity.
He's not lying.
She murmured, her voice barely above a breath.
The madness doesn't smell like him. It smells borrowed.
I knelt slowly, staying a safe distance from him.
Rohit,
I said gently.
Who are they?
He pressed both hands to his mouth as if trying to keep the words from escaping. When he finally spoke, his voice was a trembling whisper torn between worship and terror.
The ones before the world was born,
he murmured.
The watchers behind the mirrors, the 12 who saw everything, even the gods. And they said the bridge would awaken soon. They said the bridge would come to collect the sight. They said the circle waits for you.
His gaze snapped to mine with unnatural clarity.
You.
A shiver crawled up my spine. This wasn't madness. This was indoctrination. This was a man eaten alive by something far larger than Ekaksha. Sweetu was crying openly now, shoulders shaking. Rohit looked at her with shattered tenderness.
I'm sorry,
he whispered again.
I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. I just wanted to be seen.
His words cracked like dry leaves underfoot. And there it was, the truth blooming in the room, heavy and unavoidable. Rohit Malik was not evil. He was not a monster. He was not the architect of the nightmare we had barely escaped. He was a casualty. A brilliant, lonely mind taken apart piece by people or things who knew exactly how to find cracks, widen them, and pour their darkness through. Rohit's apartment did not feel lived in. It felt occupied by ideas, by obsessions, by shadows that had soaked so deeply into the walls it was impossible to tell where chalk ended and madness began. The moment I stepped inside, the air thickened in my lungs, not dusty or unclean, but heavy with the residue of rituals that didn't belong anywhere near a residential building. Rituals that had been practiced not by someone confident in them, but by someone trembling at the edge of comprehension. To my left, a tray filled with burnt coils of incense lay on the floor. Incense that did not resemble anything sold in a human market. The scent was metallic and cold, the kind of smell that might have clung to the air in forgotten caves under forgotten temples. The ashes formed patterns that might have been accidental, except that nothing in this room was accidental. On the desk, near the window, piles of fragile manuscripts lay open, brittle pages eaten at the edges, covered in scribbles of translation from archaic Prakrit dialects. But all the translations ended abruptly, cutting off mid-sentence, as if the translator had either fled or gone mad right after writing the last line. Some pages were blotched with water stains, others looked crumpled as if clenched in panic. The walls were worse. They were plastered in maps of ancient stepwells, abandoned railway tunnels, forest shrines no GPS would pick up, subterranean cave systems carved long before recorded history. Lines connected them in webs of ink and string and chalk scratches, tracing a logic that made no sense to sane minds, but carried the unmistakable feverish precision of someone who had spent too long listening to whispers no one else could hear. Sweeto's breathing hitched audibly.
I didn't know he was.
She broke off, unable to finish.
It's like the conspiracy corner of a YouTuber who lost his mind.
Sanjeevni muttered, though her voice had none of her usual bite, only a frayed edge of fear. Kia slunk forward, the fur along her spine rising.
This is not the work of one man's curiosity,
She murmured, her voice almost a purr of unease.
This is indoctrination. Someone fed him these things. Someone opened doors inside him and forgot to close them.
Rohit flinched at the sound of her voice, even though he couldn't hear the words. His gaze darted between the walls and the floor, as if the symbols themselves were whispering to him again. We moved deeper. That's when I noticed the sketches. They covered entire panels of the wall, drawn in charcoal, graphite, ink, fingertip smudges. Beings whose forms didn't obey the logic of anatomy or architecture or anything grounded in reality. Some had eyes in places that suggested they were not meant to look outward, but inward. Some had eyes stitched shut, with tears of black running down their faces. One sketch stared directly at whoever stood in front of it, no matter which angle you moved from. Another was little more than a swirling mass of lines, but the longer I looked, the more it felt like the sketch was looking back at me. None of them were Ekaksha, and somehow that was infinitely worse.
This wasn't the thing he summoned,
I said quietly. Rohit laughed suddenly, a cracked, strangled laugh that made all of us jerk back. His fingers dug into the chalk lines beside him.
No. Ekaksha was only the first sight. The lesser I. The hungry child.
He broke into a shuddering whisper.
They promised me a glimpse of the greater ones.
Sweetu covered her mouth. Sanjeevni whispered.
What greater ones?
He didn't answer. He just rocked faster. My gaze drifted to the table in the center of the room, an altar disguised as a workspace. Laid out with disturbing precision were circles of copper and salt, broken mirror shards arranged like a constellation, a cracked metal disc etched with endless rings of runes, pages upon pages of coded letters written in a script that was almost human but twisted at impossible angles. And at the center, a sigil carved into a broad wooden slab, a labyrinth of spirals and intersecting lines that seemed to fold in on themselves the longer one looked at them. Its core consisted of a single elongated eye surrounded by concentric circles, each circle etched with tiny angular markings that weren't quite letters but suggested a language hunched beneath the weight of time. The grooves were deep, as though gouged not by hand but by something sharper and far more patient. Even inert, the sigil felt like it wanted to rotate, like a lens adjusting to bring something dreadful into focus. Sweetu's knees buckled. She sank into a crouch, horror flooding her face.
That's my work.
She whispered.
Those are my lines. My pattern. He told me it was a design for a sculpture.
He used it to summon the first eye,
I said gently. Rohit's hands curled into claws.
You help me see.
He whispered, voice cracking.
You always help me see.
Sweetu's tears fell soundlessly. I turned away before the grief crushed the room and found, tucked beneath a stack of maps, a leather-bound notebook. The cover was singed, the edges crumbling slightly, but the moment I opened it, my pulse stumbled. The first page held a title, not in English, not in Sanskrit, not in any language I had ever formally studied, but one I understood instinctively and irrationally. The 12 who see. My breath caught. I turned the page. Handwritten notes spilled across it in frantic loops, mingling Prakrit, English, and a wild uneven scroll. 12 across the ages, 12 chosen, not born, 12 bridges, 12 fractures of sight and shadow, reincarnated when the veil thins, each bound to a watcher, each carrying a gift. A cold rush slid down my spine.
These aren't myths,
I whispered.
These are roles,
Kia corrected softly, sitting beside me.
living ones.
My eyes moved to the symbols sketched next to the list. One symbol resembled a cracked mirror circled by spirals. One looked like an eye inside a wheel. One resembled 3 spirals merging into one point. One symbol pulsed faintly when my finger brushed near it, a symbol that looked eerily like a railway track bending into light. A chill rippled through me. It was the closest thing I had ever seen to Orko, though no name was written, only a line scrawled beside it. The fractured one, reborn in many forms, always at the crossings. My throat tightened painfully. The next symbol was even worse, an ear surrounded by expanding rings. Under it, a single phrase, the listener. My hand froze on the page. Sanjeevni whispered cautiously,
Ipsha, you're pale, paler than usual, which is saying something.
Ipsha?
Sweetu murmured, terrified. Rohit from the corner whispered reverently, as if recognizing something divine.
The bridge hears the forgotten.
My pulse hammered. I turned the page again. More notes, more diagrams, more implications I didn't want. The listener hears what the world forgets. The mirror bearer bends light. The lantern keeper remembers the first dark. The salt binder seals the hungry ones. The ink scribe records what cannot be spoken.
these aren't titles,
I whispered.
they're destinies.
Kia's tail brushed my ankle in a rare gesture of comfort.
You're not alone in this. Not anymore.
I didn't answer, because no comfort could ease what came next. Under a loose stack of folded maps, I found 3 loose pages. A page of runes that seemed to twist when viewed directly. A page describing something called an alignment ritual torn halfway down. And the final page, stamped over and over with a single symbol. A vertical eye slit surrounded by 12 smaller marks. Beneath it, the cycle stirs again, and this time the bridge is awake. My breath left me in one sharp exhale. Ekaksha hadn't been the beginning. He had been a test, a spark, a warning shot, a summons to draw me out. Something far older, something with 12 faces and 12 ways of seeing had been stirring long before I ever stepped onto the train to Bhubaneswar. And now that I had survived, now that I had interfered, it knew exactly who I was. The hours that followed unfolded in a disjointed haze, the kind of quiet that always descends after storms. Not peaceful, not cleansing, just strangely hollow, as if the world itself were holding its breath, trying to decide whether it should crumble or pretend to carry on. Rohit sat slumped in the corner of his apartment, his back pressed against a wall covered in spirals of chalk and madness. The light from the hallway spilled across him in a sickly stripe, turning his already gaunt face into something spectral. His eyes, which had once been soft and unassuming, now glimmered with the glassy sheen of a man who had sprinted far beyond the edge of his mind and found no way back. Calling the police was out of the question, not because we didn't want accountability, but because rational explanations had long fled the scene. There was no crime we could articulate without sounding insane, no language we could use without dragging ourselves into an inquiry that would solve nothing and possibly make everything worse. And more importantly, punishing Rohit would be like punishing a clock for telling the wrong time. Pointless, cruel, and wildly misdirected. This wasn't a criminal in front of us. This was a boy caught in the undertow of something ancient and merciless, and the undertow had chewed through every last tether of sanity he had. So we called an ambulance. The paramedics moved around the apartment with quiet, efficient professionalism, though even they seemed uneasy, glancing at the maps on the walls, the scribbled symbols, the incense coils, as if something about the room made their instincts tightened. Rohit didn't resist when they approached him. He simply looked up at them with the hollow innocence of someone who had forgotten that resistance was an option. Sweetu stood by the door, fists trembling at her sides, her face blotchy and wet with tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. When they lifted Rohit onto the stretcher, her composure shattered completely. She covered her mouth with both hands, choked on a whisper of his name, and then folded into herself, as if her body couldn't bear the weight of recognizing him and losing him all at once. Sanjeevni stood behind her, one arm wrapped around her shoulders, her usual sharpness softened into something protective and heartbreakingly gentle. Even she didn't try to crack a joke. There was nothing left in her arsenal that could make sense of this. As they wheeled him through the doorway, Rohit's gaze drifted past Sweetu, past the paramedics, and landed on me with a sudden clarity that made the hair at the back of my neck rise. His eyes, fractured, fevered, consumed, recognized me in a way he had recognized nothing else all day. He lifted a trembling hand, not towards help or comfort, but toward recognition, towards someone he believed could understand the thing devouring him from the inside.
Stop,
he murmured hoarsely. The paramedics paused, exchanging uncertain looks. He swallowed hard, his lips cracked and trembling.
Come closer.
Sweetu stiffened beside Sanjeevni.
Ipsha, you don't have to.
I know,
I murmured, stepping forward anyway. When I leaned over him, he exhaled sharply, as if relieved to see me up close, as if I were somehow responsible for steadying a world he no longer understood. His voice, when it came, was a dry, ragged whisper, one that slid under my skin like cold metal.
They're coming for the lens keeper,
he rasped.
Tell the bridge, the cycle is waking.
And before I could respond, before I could ask who they were or what the hell a lens keeper was supposed to be, his gaze unfocused again. The thread snapped. Whatever window of lucidity he had opened closed as swiftly as it had appeared. The paramedics resumed their work, wheeling him down the corridor, their footsteps echoing with a strange finality. Sweetu broke then, completely, soundlessly, tears rolling down her face as if some internal floodgate had finally burst.
I never thought.
She choked.
He wasn't evil, Ipsha. He wasn't.
no,
I said quietly, watching the stretcher disappear through the stairwell door.
he wasn't the enemy. He was the door someone else used.
Sanjeevni swallowed hard, voice cracking despite her attempt to sound steady.
So, the actual villain is still out there?
Kia, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, curled her tail around my ankle.
Not just out there.
She said softly, her tone edged with grim understanding.
They're aware of you now. They know the bridge is awake.
I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The words Rohit whispered still nested in my mind, cold and poisonous.
The cycle is waking.
I stood in the corridor long after the others left, watching the empty stairwell, listening to the faint echo of the stretcher wheels, feeling the weight of something vast and ancient shift in the darkness behind the world. Somewhere far beyond this apartment, beyond this city, beyond the places I had walked and the shadows I thought I understood, something had stirred. Something that had used Rohit as an antenna.
something that had tested me with Ekaksha and now knew exactly what I was capable of and what I wasn't. And for the first time since arriving in Bhuvaneshwar, I truly understood. The battle had ended. The war had just noticed me. The morning I left Bhuvaneshwar, the city looked strangely washed out, as if the previous days had wrung every shade of color from it. The Nayak apartment felt hollow without the tension that had clung to every doorway and corridor. Even the stairwell seemed too quiet, no longer bearing the weight of secrets pressed into its walls. Sweetu hugged me so tightly at the gate that I felt her heartbeat stuttering against mine, her breath uneven against my shoulder. Sanjeevni, for once stripped of her usual bravado, muttered,
Call us when you reach. And don't go investigating random ghosts alone like a superhero with no insurance.
Kia circled my ankles twice, muttering,
Try to avoid dying. You're very tiresome when you do dramatic things.
When the train pulled out of the station, Bhuvaneshwar receded into a blur of orange lamps and dusk-hued trees. And for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to breathe in a way that wasn't stitched with dread. But just beneath that breath was a tautness, a quiet hum that hadn't existed before Orko or Ekaksha or the sigils that crawled across Rohit's walls like a silent infection. I kept touching the pocket where I'd kept the journal pages, as if verifying that the madness hadn't blown away with the wind rushing through the carriage windows. Kolkata welcomed me back with its usual chaotic tenderness. Honking autos, the scent of frying luchis from the street corner, the humidity pressing soft and warm against my skin. My mother met me at the door with the kind of ferocity that only mothers possess, grabbing my face between her palms and declaring that I had lost weight, lost sense, and lost myself on the road, and that she was going to feed me until the universe apologized. I let her fuss. It felt good to be fussed over after days of quiet tread and the lingering echo of train horns that weren't entirely from trains. Life resumed in the way life always does, not by erasing the extraordinary, but by smothering it with errands, deadlines, and half-burnt toast. My ghost walk groups restarted, though something in me had changed the way I guided them. Every alley felt like it was holding its breath. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should be. Every mirror I passed felt as though it reflected too sharply, showing me not just my face, but something waiting behind it. Once, during a tour at Bobarak's, I caught my own reflection lingering half a second longer than I did, and I spent the rest of the night pretending not to notice the cold drip of fear crawling down my spine. The materials from Rohit's apartment did not sit quietly. They lived on my desk like coiled serpents. The 3 pages of runes circled around each other as if they were engaged in silent arguments. The coded letters revealed fleeting hints of shapes I didn't want to decipher, and the listener's symbol, sketched in that frantic, uneven ink, seemed to breathe whenever my fingers hovered too close. The whole collection radiated a kind of dormant awareness, as though each fragment waited for its turn to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. And yet, every night, after Mum went to sleep, and the house sank into that familiar hum of ceiling fans and distant traffic, I found myself drawn back to them, curled over my desk with a cup of tea that always went cold before I remembered to drink it. I spent hours tracing the harsh geometry of the runes, trying to map patterns that refused to stay still. I wrote up comparison notes, cross-referencing symbols across cultures, dialects, obscure temple records, even an old railway manual that seemed irrelevant until it wasn't. I emailed 2 occult historians, under a fake name obviously, carefully crafting my questions so they sounded like academic curiosity instead of the frantic need to understand what had nearly killed us all. I reached out to ghost walkers I trusted, The grizzled veterans who knew which alleys whispered back and which riverbanks never forgot the dead and asked who might have heard of cults tied to the old site or the 12 bridges of perception. Some answered with caution, some with irritation, but their replies carried the same thread of dread. The don't poke this further variety. One elderly man from Kumartuli, the one who had guided ghost walks since before I was born, wrote back simply with, "Old sight brings old hunger. Do not lift veils you cannot unsee." Naturally, I lifted them anyway. But above all the strange terms, symbols, and half-translated fragments, one word lodged itself under my skin like a thorn I couldn't pull out. Lenscaper. The word had appeared in one of Rohit's delirious mutterings before he was taken away, and again in the half-burned letter I found in his apartment. A title, a role, not a name, not a warning, something older, something designated. I pored over every page, every scrap of his notes, hunting for the meaning hidden between the scratches of ink and madness. Lens implied sight, perception, clarity, a medium through which the truth was magnified or refracted. Keeper implied guardianship, responsibility, perhaps even sacrifice. But the way Rohit said it, that trembling reverence followed by sheer terror, told me it was more than metaphor. Whoever the lenskeeper was, the title wasn't ceremonial. It was a target. And if someone out there was looking for the lenskeeper, what would they do when they found them? What were they planning to unleash? What purpose they had convinced Rohit he was serving? And most importantly, who were they? Every time I asked myself that question, the shadows in my room seemed to shift, as if listening. Rohit had been a pawn, not the mastermind. His mind had been pulled apart and reassembled by people who understood the architecture of belief and madness far too well. Someone or something had guided him like a hand guiding a brush, turning him into a tool for summoning one fragment of an ancient horror. Ekaksha wasn't the plan, he was the beginning. And if there were indeed 12 who see, if reincarnation wasn't metaphor, if each role had its own burden, if I was the listener, then there were others out there, living unsuspecting lives with abilities they didn't yet understand. Bridges, lantern bearers, ink scribes, mirror bearers, human pieces in a game they didn't know they were part of. I leaned back in my chair, the room dim and humming, my notebook open to a page filled with symbols I could almost, but not quite decode. The bridge inside me pulsed softly, as if responding to some future echo. "I'll find them," I whispered to the dim room, the cold tea, the runes watching me like patient eyes. Whoever the lenskeeper is, whoever the others are, I'll find them all. Kolkata breathed around me, distant horns, murmuring ceiling fans, the soft footsteps of Mum heading to the kitchen for water. But for the first time in months, I felt the world expand, cracking open like a seed finally ready to sprout. Something was coming, something organized, something old, something that wanted the 12. And I had already stepped onto the tracks of whatever destiny Orko had handed me before he vanished into light. Sweetu and Sanjeevni kept in touch, first with short messages, then with long video calls that stretched late into the night. They had changed too, each in their own way. Sweetu seemed quieter, more observant, as though she were seeing her own world with new eyes. Sanjeevni pretended nothing bothered her, but every now and then she would pause mid-joke, stare into the camera and ask softly,
"You're okay, right? Like, actually okay?
Kia insisted on joining the video calls, sitting on Sweetu's lap and delivering commentary like,
Your hair looks tragic today, listener.
or,
If you die again, I'm not picking up the pieces.
between the three of us and the fourth, a cat in every physical sense but stitched with old magic in ways none of us fully understood, I could almost convince myself that things were normal. Almost. But something had shifted inside me, something fundamental, something irreversible. The bridge Orko had named, the one he said I had become, vibrated faintly inside my chest every night, like a thin silver wire twanging in the dark. Sometimes the air felt thicker than it should. Sometimes shadows formed shapes my brain refused to interpret. Sometimes I woke up from sleep with the distinct sensation of someone standing at the foot of my bed, watching. Not haunting, watching, observing, waiting. And every now and then, when the house felt still and the city outside softened into the low hum of midnight traffic, I would hear a distant train horn cutting through the silence with that same protective ache I had heard in Bhuvaneshwar, as if Orko were still standing at some cosmic crossing, insisting he had not abandoned his last task completely. I never mentioned any of this to Mum. She already worried too much. She didn't need to know her daughter was now unofficially employed by whatever invisible council managed cosmic fallout. I pretended everything was normal. I woke up, logged into work, managed tours, cooked dinner, laughed at reels, and let my mother scold me for drinking too much coffee. But beneath all of it, under the clothes, the job, the city, the facade of a life restored, something was waiting. Something organized, something ancient, something that had used Rohit as a pawn and now regarded me as a piece on the same board. And though no one had said it aloud, though the world continued spinning in blissful ignorance, I could feel it every night, humming deep under my ribs. The cycle had begun, and it would not end there. 2 months after Bhuvaneshwar had receded into the humming distance of memory, I found myself back at my desk, hunched over the same scattered pages that had once wallpapered Rohit Malik's unraveling sanity. My small room was lit only by a dim yellow lamp that made everything look older than it was. The notes, the runes, my hand, the faint smudges of graphite on my fingertips, even my own face reflected in the window pane like an after-image of someone else. Kolkata moved in its usual twilight rhythm outside, auto horns fading into the distance, neighbors arguing amiably about water timings, and the faint clatter of utensils from the kitchen, where my mother insisted she was not making another snack despite all evidence to the contrary. I was annotating a particularly dense paragraph about the listener's burden, a phrase that made my skin prickle in a way I pretended to ignore, when my phone vibrated across the desk with an urgency that felt out of place in the stillness. The caller ID flashed. Sweetu. For a moment, my chest tightened. She rarely called unannounced. When she did, it usually meant something had shifted in the undercurrent of her world, and now it was leaking into mine. I answered quickly. Sweetu? Her breath hit the speaker before her voice did, uneven, shaky, edged with fear she was trying hard to swallow.
Ipsha,
She said, using the nickname she reserved only for moments of emotional honesty.
I need you again.
I pulled the phone closer instinctively, my posture snapping straighter. What happened? There was a rustle on her end. Maybe she was pacing, maybe she was wringing her hands, maybe she was staring at something she wished she hadn't seen. When she spoke again, her voice held the same trembling steadiness I'd heard the night she confessed everything about Rohit.
It's about Sanjog,
She said, exhaling the name like a burden.
my friend from Bhubaneswar. Remember him? The one who used to drag me to all those haunted ruins and totally safe, I swear. Mystical spots during our college days?
I hummed in acknowledgement, flipping the page of the notebook, though I wasn't reading anymore.
He works in Bengaluru now,
She continued.
in the finance department of some MNC. He's always been the calmest person I know. Steady, rational, the kind of guy who alphabetizes his spice rack.
Her breath hitched sharp and soft.
But he's been having visions, Ipshu, and nightmares that don't stop. He says they feel too real, too deliberate. And his roommate?
She trailed off. I waited, the silence stretched thin. Her next words dropped like pebbles into a grave.
His roommate is seeing things too, in the dark corners of their flat. Things that aren't there at first, but then they are. And then they disappear again.
A cold ripple slid down my spine, as if someone had run a finger dipped in ice along each vertebra. I glanced at the pages sprawled across my table. The sketches of watchers, the symbol of the listener half glowing in the lamplight, the list of the 12 written in languages no one alive had any right to understand. My pulse slowed in that way it always did when something inevitable was unfolding. Sweetu inhaled shakily, then said the words she had been holding back.
I have a feeling it's connected, Ipshu. I can't explain why, but I know it. I feel it in my bones.
My fingers stopped over the margin of the notebook. The room seemed to tighten, the air thickening with the weight of recognition. The metal disc I had placed in the drawer began to hum. Faint, almost polite, but unmistakably awake, as if responding to a distant summons, as if acknowledging that the next chapter of whatever had begun months ago was now turning its own page. I closed the notebook gently, the cover tapping shut with the finality of a decision I had already made.
Ipshu?
Sweetu whispered, voice small and hopeful and terrified all at once.
Will you come with me to Bengaluru? I don't want to do this alone.
Outside, beyond the window and the tall silhouette of the peepal tree, a train horn drifted across the city. Soft, solemn, protective. Not loud, not dramatic, but pointed, like a reminder that bridges once awakened did not simply go back to sleep. I let the sound settle into my bones before answering. I'm on my way, I whispered, and the night seemed to exhale, not in relief, but in anticipation. Some stories end quietly, some end with a scream, and some end like this, with a door half open, a shadow waiting just out of sight, and a question humming under your skin long after the night is over. Ekaksha was just the beginning, a single eye in a hall of mirrors, a test disguised as terror. But the world is older than its myths, and the ones who shaped the first sight, they are stirring again. Thank you for walking this bridge with me, for listening in the dark, for keeping your eyes open when the shadows lean too close. And if you're joining Vixen After Dark for the first time, welcome. You can catch up on the whole journey, the entire arc, right here on my channel in the Vixen After Dark playlist. Start from episode 1 and let the shadows build slowly. To my returning listeners, you're the heart of this story. If you enjoyed this series, share it with someone who loves a good chill. Drop a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Hit like, hit subscribe, let me know you're out there listening with me. Every little bit helps this universe grow. Vixen After Dark will return. A new city calling, new dangers forming, and new watchers opening their eyes in the dark. Until then, sleep tightly, look away from mirrors at night, Hug your loved ones a little closer tonight. The world is wide, old, and strange, but you don't walk it alone. And if you hear a train horn when there shouldn't be one, don't be afraid. It just means the bridge is still watching over you.